Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great today. Okay, so from the very beginning of this year, 2022, as many of you can bear me witness, I started warning us to be psychologically prepared for some of the things that we all believe may be going down at some point in this year, which may not really be in the interest of any one of us, i.e., the war that is looming between Russia, Ukraine, NATO, America, and by extension, China. Now, I posted a video, I titled it, The Video That Scared Me About 2022. And in that video, we all heard how that the man had detailed the plans of the globalists to start a war. Now, when that video was published, there were a few things that are now in place today that were not in place then. And one of them is the fact that a new pact has now been signed between Russia and China. And that pact enables both of them to jointly attack any enemy that attacks or infringes on the security of either of them. And of course, remember that in that video, the man had said that it will be Russia, China, and Arabs trying to take over Europe and America. As at that time, I remind you again, this pact between Russia and China had not been signed. It just happened, I think, about last week. So you can see that that video was telling us the truth. He said it was intelligence information. And the reason I shared it was because, as I told you, because I had been researching stuff like this in the past, and seeing that video, it rang a bell. I saw too many dots connecting. And that's why I decided to share. If you are a researcher and you see something that rings a bell, there's no way you're not going to find out. That's why I shared it with my brothers and sisters out there. And the whole thing is beginning to play out today. Now, the reason I'm making this video is for the very first time, I am going to explain to you why no amount of mediation, no amount of intervention will stop this war that is about to happen. Not because I don't want it to be stopped, but because what was said in that video is almost like it's cast on stone. That's the character of the globalists. The globalists will plan something like a massive war as we see now unfolding. And what they do with the rest of human population is they will start walking us through a psychological and emotional preparation so that we can get used to the sound of war before the actual war itself now happens. That's the process we are undergoing right now. This is why all these negotiations are taking place. That's why you will see a Macron meeting with Russian President Putin, and yet weapons are being sent to Ukraine. That's why meetings are going to be taking place in Paris and in Germany, and weapons are flooding into Ukraine, and Russia is putting more soldiers and more weapons by the border between Russia and Ukraine. So the negotiations are like just playing games. It means nothing to them. As far as they're concerned, the war is fait accompli. And I'm going to show you today why the war is fait accompli. Why the war must happen in their own eyes. Why the war is actually very necessary. They can't allow it to go. That's why you see them very feverish. You see the American president pushing. He doesn't even want to listen to anything. You see the British Prime Minister pushing. I mean, no matter what you say, even though he has his own issues back home, he's moving all over the place looking for alliances because they believe they have intelligence information that Russia will soon attack Ukraine and the war will be started. But why do they desperately need this war to happen? I'll explain it to you, but before I explain it to you, let me explain to you why Russia feels cheated, why Russia feels angry and mad at what the Western nations are doing.
Yes, live is Professor Peter Matthews, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College in LA. Great to see you, Professor.
Good to see you, Janie. How are you?
Very well indeed. So what do you think Putin's true motivations are surrounding Ukraine? Is it strategic or Ukraine being part of Mother Russia?
I think we got to go back a bit to history. We look at the negotiations when Germany was being reunited back in 1990. President Bush and his administration, H.W. Bush, promised the Soviet leader Gorbachev that if he would allow Germany to reunite, that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. And that was back to James Baker's own words. NATO would not be expanded toward the Russian, the former Soviet borders, or the Soviet borders, or into the Soviet republics. So when the Soviet Union disbanded, that's the first thing that NATO started doing, is they allowed other countries in Eastern Europe and former Soviet republics to join NATO, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So the problem here is, what do both sides want? The Russians don't want to have Ukraine become part of NATO. They want to pledge that Ukraine will not become part of NATO. The United States and NATO and Western countries want Russia not to use force to change borders, not to occupy Ukraine or invade it.
George H.W. Bush promised Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, 1 inch close to the Soviet Republic borders. That was the agreement. If Gorbachev agreed to allow Eastern Germany and Western Germany to reunite. That was the agreement. It's known to the whole world. Everybody knows about this. They said it would not happen. But then when the Soviet Republic was disbanded, the first thing that happened was NATO began to assimilate, began to admit Eastern European nations that were part of the former Soviet Republic. They were now allowing them to join NATO. And the example of those nations are Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. All these nations were part of that Soviet bloc, but they've been allowed to join NATO. You can imagine how angry that makes Russia. And so while Russia was still fuming at that, NATO is now expanding even further into Ukraine. Now, you had entered the compound and they are still fighting that. You're now coming to the very doorstep of the Russian nation. Because I've been to Ukraine before. If you've been to Ukraine, Ukraine is almost like Russia. It's just like Washington, D.C. and Maryland, or Maryland and Virginia. Can you imagine that? That's exactly how Ukraine is to Russia. That's why the last time when Russia went and took over that small place, Crimea, that Crimea is full of people speaking fluent Russian. I mean, the language you speak in Ukraine and the one you speak in Russia is basically the same thing. They understand themselves. So these are basically the same people. And so in the interest of their national security, just as it is with every superpower on earth or every constitutional entity on earth, you do not allow a perceived or potential enemy come and bring their military structures close to your border or close to your house as a nation. That is an infringement on the security situation in that country. It simply means that the country is making itself vulnerable. It's like America allowing a country like China or any other nation that is antagonistic to the interests of the US to come and set up in Cuba or have a security pact with Cuba. In fact, America can actually burn down Cuba for the sake of that. So that's what nations do. So Russia is not doing something that is alien to nation states. That's basically what nation states do. They don't want a rival or an opponent or an enemy to come closer to them, especially militarily. And what is happening in Ukraine is that the Western nations are not only saying that Ukraine will become a part of NATO, they are also making sure that they move military structures into that same country. That means almost like surrounding the nation of Russia. That's the point of view of Russia that I'm trying to help you understand. There's a document actually to this effect. And here is the document, because the document basically just says what the man has said in the video. Now, so he says here, President George H.W. Bush had assured Gorbachev during the Malta summit in December 1989 that the U.S. would not take advantage, I have not jumped up and down on Berlin Wall, of the revolution in Eastern Europe to harm Soviet interests. But neither Bush nor Gorbachev at that point expected so soon the collapse of East Germany or the speed of German unification. They did not think that German unification, that is the unification between West and East, was going to happen so fast. So the first concrete assurances by Western leaders on NATO began on January 31, 1990, when West German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher opened the bidding with a major public speech at Tutzing in Bavaria on German unification. The U.S. Embassy in Bonn informed Washington that Genscher made clear that the changes in Eastern Europe and the German unification process must not lead to an impairment of Soviet security interests. You see what I was telling you? It's all about security interests of the Soviet Republic. Therefore, NATO should rule out an expansion of its territory towards the east, that is, moving it closer to the Soviet borders. The Bonn cable also noted Genscher's proposal to leave the East German territory out of NATO military structures, even in a unified Germany in NATO. So this was an understanding. It was written. That's what Putin is going around the whole place, showing everybody, say, look, we had an agreement to look at what these people are doing. We had an agreement that they were not going to expand up to this point. They had already expanded and they are now coming to my doorstep. What do they want me to do? I am not going to sit idly and watch them now encircle me like that, and I will become like a man who is under siege or under house arrest in his own territory. And you know, Putin is leading a nation that we consider a world superpower. So that's why this is not easy for him to take. You remember when Putin sent a document to the United States of America and to NATO and said he wanted a response. And these were the assurances that he wanted them to give him so that they can pull their military, their soldiers back into Russia. Okay? But the assurance included that US or NATO will never allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO. And NATO said that is a non-starter. You can never make us agree to that because we want Ukraine to become a part of NATO. America also supported the NATO allies and said, no, Russia, you cannot give such a condition that Ukraine should not become a part of NATO. No, Ukraine has to be allowed to become a part of NATO. They are a free nation. They must be allowed to have their own destiny in their hands. You cannot be in Russia and be determining their destiny. But of course, diplomatically speaking, everybody knows where Russia is coming from. So this is why there's not going to be any simple solution to this thing. Because the only thing that could have brought this solution, NATO will not agree to it and Russia is not going to accept it. So this is why the war is bound to happen. But the problem here is, why is it that from everything we are looking at, from the news we are watching, it almost appears as if the Western nations are so eager for this to happen. Negotiations are taking place, as I said earlier, and Boris Johnson is in different places negotiating and preparing because they already have intelligence information that is like Russia wants to enter and occupy Ukraine or take over Ukraine. American president is meeting with Germany to secure commitment from Germany while negotiations are still taking place. So it's like those negotiations and mediations don't mean anything. Those dialogues don't mean anything to them. They are desperate to have this thing take place. And my question is, I have not seen any genuine effort on the part of the world leaders trying to actually bring about a solution or de-escalate the situation. What I have seen is a consistent effort to actually continually escalate the already escalated situation in that part of the world. But why? I'm going to explain to you why the situation is like this.